Hey guys, this is Mr. Roxy coming to July from Palm Beach in Florida. It is July the 7th. I want to talk a little bit about a serious topic tonight. I'm not going to talk about stocks. I want to talk about the global energy crisis and maybe highlight some of the misinformation that is being shared with us in the media. So what I've done is I put together a presentation. I might run a little longer than usual. So if you get bored, or if you need to move on and do something else, then do that. You can always come back and watch this later because obviously I'm not going to take it down. So the first one, a little bit tongue-in-cheek, a little bit of a joke. Stab at our friends in Germany. Wait, stop, build it back up. Nuclear power. Germany currently has 3 active nuclear reactors, and they want to shut them down in order to score some political points, because it makes absolutely no sense for them to shut down these last 3 remaining nuclear reactors. In fact, if anything, they should be making an investment, firing them back up, and addressing some of the energy concerns, but more about that as we go on. Let's talk a little bit about the gas price here. Now, in case you can't see it clearly on the little picture on the top left, this is just the absolute picture of hypocrisy. It's a small electric vehicle pulling up to an electric charging station powered by a diesel generator. And we see too much of this lately. It's just complete hypocrisy. It's not even a joke. It's not funny. It's just stupid. In the United States, filling up your car is almost 50% more expensive than it was last year. So at around the same time, averaging about $4.50 for a gallon of gas. In the UK, the average price at the pump is closer to $10, not a gallon, but per liter. So that's a lot of money. 1 gallon is approximately 4 liters. And if you look at the price, it's about $1 for a liter in the United States, and people are complaining. In the UK, it's getting close to $10 a liter. You can let me know if I'm off on that one or not in the comments below. Across the world, Austria and Germany were planning to ration natural gas usage. UK consumers had to swallow a 54% price increase to heat their homes. This was just a couple of months ago. Putin said that customers must pay for Russian gas in rubles or face being cut off. People think Putin is in a weak position. He's actually bargaining from a position of strength. And that's just a matter of fact. And Biden dipped into the country's SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is now at its lowest level in nearly 30 years. But despite all of the above, a barrel of oil still costs 60% more than it did just a year ago. Interventions to bring the price down haven't worked. Now, Putin is taking the blame for a lot of stuff, and especially Biden is basically saying this is Putin's price hike. But I just want to remind you guys that it's not Vladimir Putin who canceled the XL pipeline, the Keystone XL. It's not Putin who released the Strategic Petroleum Reserve from the United States. It's not Putin who asked OPEC to draw more. It's not Putin who canceled leases on federal lands in the United States. And more and more and more. This is Biden. It's got nothing to do with Putin, except for the fact that the proxy war that's going on in the Ukraine obviously impacts the price, much to Russia's advantage, despite the sanctions imposed against Russia. Wherever you are and whatever you do, you have almost certainly felt the sting of the global energy crisis. I've said this many times before. Whatever you touch, feel, eat, drink, etc., is going to cost you more money when energy goes higher. Don't be fooled by the dip that we had over the past few days. Energy is going higher, not lower. We got into this mess long before the Ukraine war. That's just another indicator of Biden's garbage that he spews through the media all the time, says Thierry Bros, a professor of energy at the Sciences Po University in Paris. The European Union has an overdependency on Gazprom, which ironically is majority owned by the Russian state. And that makes it almost impossible to replace all the Russian gas overnight. Russia is the world's 2nd largest supplier of natural gas behind the United States, and the 3rd largest supplier of oil behind the United States and Saudi Arabia. The world has basically sleepwalked into the energy crisis by stupidly focusing on a post-fossil fuel future at the expense of their own economies and peoples. Hey, you know what? You can go green as much as you want, but if you go green before you can afford to go green at the risk of crashing your whole economy, then you are acting stupidly and you're not acting in the best interest of the people. Germany, as I said at the beginning, is closing several of its nuclear power plants. They only have 3 remaining at a time when they still work and they are still needed. The European Union can probably survive without Russian oil because they are the sources of oil that they can tap into. The European Union currently relies on Russia for about 30% of its oil, but it relies on Russia for about 40% of its gas, and it cannot survive without that Russian gas. Putin said that he will require payment for Russian gas supplies in rubles as of April 1. You can only do that when you're bargaining from a position of strength. Germany described Putin's demand as blackmail, but feeling hurt or having your feelings hurt and feeling offended is not going to help Germany's future gas supply disruptions. I'm picking on Germany specifically because Germany, led by the Greens, is absolutely focused and intent on closing those 3 last nuclear reactions when they are critically needed in order to boost Germany's energy supply. And by the way, when you think of it, nuclear energy is probably the safest, most efficient, and done properly, one of the cheapest ways of creating energy. And in addition to that, it's absolutely environmentally friendly. Biden's ongoing global humiliation continues. It seems to me as if our fearless president is just being humiliated almost on a daily basis. If it's not because of what he does, it's because of what he says or how he says it. But from an energy point of view, most significantly, his request to OPEC to increase production. It's like, what are you thinking? And do you honestly think that Biden and the people who surround him don't know who OPEC is? At the end of the day, there are countries that hold sway within OPEC. In addition to Saudi Arabia, there are countries like Iran and countries like Russia and Venezuela who are arguably, to a degree anyway, sworn enemies of the United States, and they are OPEC members. Now, why would OPEC refuse? OPEC won't open the taps, and that's purely for economic reasons. High prices mean more energy, more money, And most OPEC countries like Russia are likely to benefit from the current market crunch. You can't press OPEC to supply more oil because they exist. OPEC, the cartel, exists to ensure higher revenues for their cartel members. They want high prices, not low prices. It makes no sense to ask them to increase production. And more importantly, why would you ask them in the first place when you could put a call into some of your local friends? The problem is Biden doesn't have any friends, but if you had to call and just speak to the CEOs of Chevron or Exxon or of ConocoPhillips, Marathon Oil, Occidental Petroleum, all these companies have the capacity to produce more, not right away because we have a supply crunch, but certainly with a bit of support and a bit of the freeing up of the almost 4,600 federal leases that are currently either in logjam or canceled by the Environmental Protection Agency and the Biden administration. If you just release some of it, half of it, 2,300 leases, federal leases, there's production that can be tapped into almost right away. And in addition to that, more capex can be expended in terms of exploration. So there's absolutely no reason to do that other than standing up for your election promises, Mr. Biden, of saying, I'm going to kill fossil fuels. If that's what you want to do, you're killing the American economy at the same time. And if it sounds a bit harsh, and if you voted for the Democrats, I'm sorry, but unfortunately, your commander-in-chief and the CEO that you appointed is hopelessly inept and is failing at every single thing he's doing. And if you still like him, that's just too bad. Then you probably shouldn't be watching the rest of this because I might mention Biden another 10 times. OPEC and its allied producing countries, including Russia. If you ask OPEC to produce more oil, you are asking Russia to produce more oil. You are asking Venezuela to produce more oil instead of asking ConocoPhillips, Marathon Oil, Occidental Petroleum, etc., etc. It's like, come on, man, call your friends before you call your enemies or however you want to view them. The OPEC countries did offer to raise production by 648 barrels per day in July and August. 648 barrels per day is half of what Occidental Petroleum produces on its own on a daily basis. It is nothing. They're only offering modest relief for a global economy suffering from soaring energy prices. They are doing absolutely nothing to help your friend Joe Biden. In fact, they're doing everything they can just to put the squeeze on him with their friend Vladimir Putin. The world, by the way, has been on the brink of an energy crisis for years. This is not new. Ever since the powers that be jumped in boots and all and started supporting ignorant people like Greta Thunberg, the entire energy crisis had not only begun, but started gathering steam. And that's why we find ourselves in the situation that we are today. Stupidity rules. Politicians prefer to win votes with eye-catching populist green policies. And by the way, this isn't even a right-wing, left-wing comment. This is just in general, because they support one another. They are in it together. The victims in this particular example are the people. The people right across the world are suffering because of the poor decisions by the politicians. It doesn't matter whether they are conservative or whether they are liberal, whether they are in the US Republicans or Democrats. It does not matter. What is happening is that the people, the average guy in the street, the average person who's living paycheck to paycheck, the average family that has to rely on two incomes to feed their family, are seeing their cost soar. And it's not just the cost of gasoline, it's the cost of everything they touch, feel, consume, etc. So every single time mom or dad goes to the supermarket, every basket of groceries that they buy is costing them more money, in addition to the fact that it's costing them almost 2 times what it cost them a year ago to fill up their car. Now, there are federal agencies right across the world who will try to tell you that the inflation rate currently is around 7, 8%. Some even say it's 5.5% or whatever, depending on what jurisdiction you're in or what country you live in. It is not a single-digit number. It is a double-digit number, because at the end of the day, what you want to do is use the CPI as a guideline. And then even from that, you can strip away the things that are included in the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, on an ongoing basis, and look at the things that we consume every single day. Food, drink, gasoline for your car, etc. Those things are up 30, 40, 50, 100% in the case of petrol or gasoline. Meanwhile, the global share of gas energy consumption has never been higher at a time when the world is supposedly greening its energy supply. This is epic failure, beyond anything I've actually seen in my extended lifetime on Earth, because I'm getting old. You guys, many of you, are still going to have to live through a number of these cycles. But for me, this is just fascinating to observe. It makes me angry, but at the same time, it makes me more and more focused on saying, I got to get this message out here, because this is just wrong. Politicians threatening windfall taxes on energy companies. Where have you ever seen such a stupid thing? It's completely counterintuitive, because it helps to limit their ability, the oil companies, to invest in alternative solutions. The global share of renewables in electricity generation grew to 38% in 2021, not supported fast enough to make up for the fossil fuel shortfalls in the case of emergencies. The global energy crisis has demonstrated to us just how broken things really are. Guys, by the way, this is not even just related to energy. This is related on a far, far greater scale, a far broader topic that we can discuss as it relates to a whole variety of different things like unemployment, jobs, healthcare, vaccinations, energy, etc. There are many, many things wrong today, and they are going to become progressively more wrong unless we, who have the power within ourselves to do something about it, step up and actually take action. How renewable subsidies work. I couldn't resist adding this little cartoon into the presentation, because it just shows you sort of the cycle. The first time I actually became aware of this was actually a little study from a Canadian point of view, when Justin Trudeau tried to convince Canadians that if they pay more taxes, we can save the planet. You don't pay more taxes to save the planet. You pay more taxes to give politicians more money. And here's a perfect picture of how this works. You take from the taxpayer's pocket and you hand it over to these so-called renewable energy companies, who basically just form a loop and take from you on an ongoing basis. Politicians all over the world are now forced to try alternative methods to suppress energy demand and shrink the supply gap. The UK government's recent announcement of an energy price cap for customers is another example of short-term thinking that exacerbates rather than addresses the underlying issues within the market. A price cap limits the amount suppliers can charge households, even if wholesale prices increase more than the 54% mandated rise. Crazy stuff. Germany and Austria plan to ration gas in the face of high prices. And rationing occurs because of fears about the long-term viability of Russian supply. Germany meets 50% of its gas demand from Russia, while Austria relies on Russia for 80% of its gas. It's crazy, crazy stuff. Markets, the stock market going up and down, right? So every time we see our favorite stocks taking a nosedive, we feel stressed about the fact that the price is going down. But the fact of the matter is simply this: markets are the best solution for high prices. You get demand destruction. And what we have here is a situation where we have a supply crunch. There's just not enough supply to meet the ever-growing or increasing demand, in addition to the fact that the sanctions imposed against Russia is restricting the demand even further. But we have a supply crunch. You cannot instantly address that supply crunch because it takes about a year or so for companies to get their refineries back up in order to take crude and turn it into things like gasoline or cooking oil or anything of that nature. So what you want to do, or what you want to actually use as a potential solution, is the market, because the market will give you some demand destruction. And I'm not implying that we need a total demand destruction. What we just need to do is rein in the demand slightly in order for it to become sort of within equilibrium with supply. And currently we don't have that. The state can support those who are unable. In other words, the poorest people, the people who are most hurt in this particular equation, through other governmental levers, rather than instigate rationing on price caps. With price-driven demand destruction, users that don't need to consume energy, for example, fertilizer firms that use gas, or individuals who drive cars as an option rather than as a necessity. In other words, if you don't have to drive and you don't have to fill up your car, in itself, that creates a bit of demand destruction. Those examples, they drop out as the prices get too high for them to continue driving just for the fun of driving. And at the same time, government financial stipends can support households who are struggling to pay their bills. The people who are getting hurt the most are the people who can least afford to get hurt. Demand destruction will lead to a temporary reduction in the amount of energy we need, which in turn will give the market some breathing space to readjust in times of shortage. We've seen a little bit of that come into play over the past few weeks or so as the prices have pulled back. But to be fair, in the same way a rising tide lifts all boats, in the same manner, when everything goes down, when the entire market crashes, it pulls down everything with it, including energy. On that point, in terms of the market sectors right now, energy is still by far the cheapest investment sector. The average on the S&P 500 from a price earnings point of view currently is 15.1. And the average on the energy sector as a whole is 9.3. So there are a lot of bargains to be picked up in the energy sector if you take the time to just look for them. There's another impossible to ignore factor at play. The world may now need to temporarily postpone its green energy plans. Now, then this may sound like a little bit of wishful thinking, but at the end of the day, they have pumped so much money into green energy and taken so much away from the companies that can actually make a difference. And I'll talk more about that one in just a second. After they've overlooked clean energy options when there was plentiful fossil fuel supply. Even at that point in time, they just kept pumping money into so-called green energy plans, and most of these things have just either been hopelessly inefficient or have failed, or otherwise have not lived up to the hype in terms of how it was sold to us. Renewables cannot do much. Low carbon sources of energy account for less than 40% of global electricity generation, which is a significant proportion, but not enough to survive on. And renewable energy growth slowed last year for the first time compared to the 10-year average. So renewable energy growth was actually less last year than what it had been over the past 10 years on average. Suggestion? Put the climate crisis on hold for a few months. How's that for a far-reaching, ridiculous idea, right? Tell the World Economic Forum and the powers that be that are trying to control everything by scaring us with things like climate change to just take a breather. Just wait for a few months. You don't have to wait for many, many years. You don't have to wait until the ice caps melt and that we all underwater because of ocean level rise, just take a little breather. Say like, hey, you know what? Let's just stop with the climate change stuff for about 6 months or so and see how we do. And burn whatever is available now. We got lots of fossil fuels. We got fossil fuels in abundance. Just yesterday, I saw a study that said the Permian Basin alone, in other words, that little patch sort of in Texas, that patch on its own, the Permian Basin, has enough fuel, if it's produced correctly and properly, to support the Earth's consumption based on current consumption for 200 years. Just the Permian Basin on its own. And renewable energy, as I said, has slowed last year. Put the climate crisis on hold for a few months and burn whatever is available now. And then when the fossil fuel prices come down a bit, then you can move back into green tech as much as you like and whatever you want to do. Bringing the global energy crisis to an end by swallowing higher prices and undoing years of progress on climate change may seem drastic, but we are experiencing drastic times. We have a military crisis. And even though all the focus is on the Ukraine and the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, don't forget or don't ignore for a minute that the world is basically at war almost permanently. There's a much more significant and greater war going on in Yemen right now than the war in Ukraine. The only reason why the Ukraine is attractive for us to be paying attention to and pumping money into is because it's of strategic importance, because it is Europe's gateway to Russia, or conversely, Russia's gateway to remaining sort of in its status as a superpower. That's why it's important. It's not so much because of the Ukraine. It's not because of comedian turned President Zelensky. It's not about that. It's a geopolitical war, and it's a proxy war in order to make sure that the European and American powers that be can create some kind of a foothold as close to the Russian border as possible in order to just choke Putin like a proverbial boa. The only difference is Putin is, as I said earlier in this presentation, bargaining from a position of strength because he's the guy who is literally supplying most of Europe's oil and gas. We have a military crisis, an economic crisis, an energy crisis, plus a climate crisis all at the same time. The climate crisis gets the inverted commas because the climate crisis is the other three are elephants in the room. The climate crisis is the Casper the ghost in the room. If we don't solve them in order, we will solve nothing. The urgency of the energy supply crisis outpaces the rate at which we can build a desired, cleaner, greener infrastructure. It will also require brutal honesty from politicians. Hey, you know what? You may not agree with everything I've just said in this particular presentation. And some of the stuff that I'm sharing with you may not necessarily be factually correct. As far as I know, everything I'm sharing with you is absolutely 100% gospel. It's all good, right? But it's possible to make a mistake and it's possible to get the wrong information. What we lack, obviously, is brutal honesty from politicians. Can there just be like one or two of them who stand up and say, quite honestly, this is what we want to do? And look how these guys are kind of like just dropping. You know, we saw Prime Minister Morrison in Australia and now Prime Minister Boris Johnson in the UK getting toppled. Maybe the next guy, I don't know who the next guy is, but maybe it's Rutte from the Netherlands or Trudeau from Canada, or heaven forbid Biden, because if Biden goes, then we get President Kamala Harris, and I'm not sure which would be worse. But, you know, can we just get an honest politician to actually just step forward and say, all right, guys, here's the actual story. This is what we're going to do. And this is what we're going to spend time on and spend money on in terms of fixing or addressing the problem. You can still build this desired cleaner, greener infrastructure, but don't crash everything in the meantime. If we can get some honesty from politicians, they will need to embrace unpopular measures. That's unlikely to happen, right? I just can't see that happening. What's going to happen? Politicians who, for the past decade or so, have been running on clean and green. And don't forget, this started long ago with people like Al Gore saying that the ice caps are going to melt within 10 years. But that was like in 1990. It didn't happen. And then a few years ago, what is it now, 4 or 5 years ago? No, 3 years ago, Alicia Ocasio-Cortez said there's only 12 years remaining before we are going to be underwater because of sea level rise. You know, these things are just scare tactics in order to get you to comply, to behave, to pay more taxes, whatever the case might be. They're not being brutally honest. It'll be fantastic if we could actually get a politician that can be honest. Germany, I'm picking on Germany for sure. because Germany is a leader in terms of what the European Union does. It needs to reconsider its approach to nuclear. And other countries will be forced to reconsider their attitude towards fossil fuels. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I made a video and I called it Climate Change, the adult version. Not too many people watched it. And you know what? If you're not interested, it doesn't matter. But what I was doing there was I was talking about climate change, the adult version. And I've had debates with uber green people who say no more oil, no more gas, no more fossil fuels, kind of like Biden, right? It's sort of like parroting whatever the leader of that particular cult says, they just follow and say the same thing over and over and over again. No more oil, no more gas. And, you know, I try to explain that it doesn't work that way, but very frequently I just fail. So just a short while ago, I had dinner with a friend who is kind of like if I call him a left-wing radical, he'll probably call me a right-wing radical because I support fossil fuels. And by the way, I'm kind of apolitical. I'm actually literally registered as no party affiliation in the United States. So I don't subscribe to or belong to any of these cults. I kind of just do my own thing and pilot my own aircraft. Anyway, I had dinner with a friend of mine and we were chatting, and he lives in Pennsylvania. And of course, I live in Florida. And over dinner, he asked me, so what does it feel like to be living in a state that's going to be underwater within the next decade? And I replied and said, you know, it's an interesting observation because arguably, if Florida is going to be underwater within the next, 10, 12 years, whatever, then given the fact that we are a peninsula bordering the Atlantic Ocean, then, the west coast of Africa and, parts of Southwest Europe or whatever is probably going to be underwater as well. But like, don't you feel for the people in Africa? Coastal countries like Ghana in Africa, they're on the Atlantic Ocean too. They'd be underwater as well. And I thought that's a reasonable counter until he gave me his response. And he said, no, they won't be underwater because they don't pollute as much as we do. So like, really? What if you believe that, then I have nothing more that I can share with you, because if ocean rise is only going to happen on the east coast of Florida, but not the west coast of Africa or whatever, how does that even make sense? Anyway, it's supposed to be funny. We need oil and gas. Pressing companies not to produce has driven our supply down. The windfall taxes that they're proposing is just a no-go. There are no quick fixes for the global energy crisis. Energy super majors are used to investing for the long term, 10 to 30 years plus, to achieve desired results. They are our best resources to help solve the problem. So back to the little video clip that I added at the top there. That's the thumbnail for that video. My point was, and my point here is, that companies like Occidental Petroleum, by investing in oxy low carbon ventures, have the ability to literally drive the climate change agenda. And those are the people that you want to support. And those are the people, Mr. Biden, that you should be speaking with instead of begging OPEC to produce more oil. So I don't know how many people will see this video. Maybe just a couple of hundred, maybe not even. It doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, if there are parts of this video that you find agreeable, then it becomes your mission to speak out and make sure that you educate people. Because if you don't do that, then you become complicit in the problem as we see it today. So I'll leave you with this one. Here is another load of electric car fuel leaving Wyoming. 2 massive trains carrying coal from Wyoming. Electric car fuel. That's how it is today. That's how it works today. So I accept this presentation was a bit of a mouthful. To some of you, it might seem somewhat political. Everything is political. Germany shutting down the nuclear reactors is political because it's driven by the Greens. And by that, I don't mean people who follow a green agenda like Greta Thunberg. I'm talking about politically green. Toppling Boris Johnson is political. Putting the squeeze on Vladimir Putin is political. Biden's continued humiliation of the United States is political. It's not my intent to be political, but at the same time, I cannot avoid it. What I want to do is to make sure that you get some facts as it relates to the global energy crisis. I look forward to your comments. Shoot me down if you want. Correct me where I said the wrong things. But either way, let's get the conversation going and share it with as many people as you can. Not this video, just share the conversation with them to make sure that they are well informed and make quality decisions. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.